Our conversation with Gaylon White, the author of Left on Base in the Bush Leagues, is brought to you by Marcus & Mack, a law firm representing injured people. We need a baseball fix here. We don't have our Buccos on the air. We don't have our Altoona Curve on the air. We don't have anybody playing baseball now. But back in the day, there were many. And, of course, Gaylon, we speak with you quite often. Good morning. How are you?
Doing well, thank you.
It's good to have you on the air with us again. We've had you on the air with our Ransom Jackson conversation and with, who was the book about the young man in the minors years ago, the shortstop?
Oh, that was Artie Wilson.
Artie Wilson,
Smiles.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
it
Singles and Smiles.
could have been Jackie Robinson. In fact, some of the Negro League owners recommended him to be the guy to break the color barrier, but instead it was Jackie, and as Artie always said, Jackie was the right choice, but he was a better shortstop.
Yeah. You know, one of the interesting things, though, is that your latest book, Left on Base in the Bush Leagues, was a book that I got more comments about that book and about the stories that you tell in it than probably any baseball book I've done in quite some time. It was amazing the number of people that said, you know, I want to read that one.
It's a life's work. I started work on Left on Base back in the 70s. Interviewed people like Steve Dalkowski from Nanticoke and Ron Netchai from, then he lived in Monongahela. Joe Taylor, who grew up in the Pittsburgh area, I remember I interviewed him there in one of the housing projects where he was living at the time. And Carlos Bernier, who played for the Pirates, I interviewed him in Patterson, New Jersey. So most of the research for that book was done in the 70s, and over time it evolved into, for example, writing about Steve Dalkowski, because one of the people that I was talking to, Harry Dunlop, who was the catcher in the Ron Netchai 27 strikeout game, also managed Steve Dalkowski at the end of his amazing career. So that led to me writing about Ron Netchai and Steve Dalkowski in a chapter called A Tale of Two Legends. And, of course, with the death April 19 of Steve Dalkowski from complications from COVID-19, it makes it particularly newsworthy now. And then, of course, we don't have any baseball to talk about.
Yeah, well, Steve Dalkowski is certainly a nice place to land as we talk about baseball stories and baseball legends, minor league legends. As you point out, he was the guy after whom Nuke LaLoosh was modeled in Bull Durham, just a guy with a tremendous arm who had no idea where he was throwing the baseball.
No, it's like Paul Richards said, there's two kinds of hard throwers. One who can throw the ball over the plate, and then others like Dalkowski, who you'd have to give him the planet as a target, and he still might miss.
I remember reading that. That was so good. But it really does bring to mind a guy who they said threw harder than Nolan Ryan, and we certainly have an authority on that. Cal Ripken Sr. saw them both.
That's right, and one of his managers, Billy DeMars, faced Bob Feller, and Billy DeMars was like a father to Steve Dalkowski, saw his potential, always maintained that he threw harder than anyone, including Bob Feller, who was at that time when Dalkowski came on the scene in 1957, he was recognized as the hardest thrower in history. So everybody could see the potential in Dalkowski, and that's why so many people over his 9-year career tried to bring out the best in him, and they felt that if they could do that, he was going to be totally unhittable. But he was wild off the field as well as on the field. You know, the stories of how he walked in one season, he walked 262 batters, and he struck out 262. In his career, he struck out 1,396 batters in 995 innings. That's more than one strikeout per inning. Unfortunately, he also walked 1,354 batters. So he well deserving of the nickname Whiff or Walk Dalkowski.
Yeah. And the stories, I would guess that you came across enough minor league baseball players and legends in their own times that I bet you a bunch of them had Steve Dalkowski stories. People were afraid to step into the batter's box against him.
Absolutely. In fact, George Vexey of the New York Times writes about when Roger Maris, this is soon after he hit 61 home runs in 1961, it was at spring training and he was facing Dalkowski. And Vexy writes, when they met, Maris was theoretically standing near home plate in Miami, but his fanny was more or less in the Bahamas. So that gives you an idea. There's the famous story about Ted Williams, who, of course, it was always said that Ted could count the seams on a baseball. That's how well he saw. But Ted stepped in against Dalkowski, watched one pitch go by. You might say he heard a pitch go by. He didn't see it. He stepped out and said he wasn't going to step in against him again. So nobody wanted to face him. There's another story I write about in the book. This is in Rochester, and Dalkowski came in to throw batting practice, and Rochester at that time had two minor league legends, Steve Dalkowski, home run called Sergeant of SWAT in the minors, and then Luke Easter, one of the all-time greats, minor league players, and both were on that Rochester team. They saw Dalkowski come in to throw batting practice, and they told the younger players, it's your guys' turn. We're not going to hit. So.
Well, that Ted Williams story was great because of the circumstance of it. It was said that Ted Williams said he had heard so much about Dalkowski, he just wanted to step in and experience a Dalkowski pitch, and one was enough for him.
Yes. Yeah, there's variations of the story, but it's been told enough that it's true. Dalkowski, there's so many stories around him. Some of them are myth, some are legend. One of the myths is that here in Kingsport, and this would have been in his second outing, he did hit this guy, Bob Beavers, in the head, hit him in the ear. Mm-hmm. Now, the myth is that Beavers lost part of his ear and never played ball again. That's not true. He didn't lose part of his ear. It was, you might say, pretty well banged up. And he did play semi-pro ball later. But Dalkowski, I think, was afraid of hitting batters in the head. Most of his wildness, though, was described as being mostly up and down. He was known to throw a ball high up on the backstop. In fact, one time, one of his balls went over near a concession stand and supposedly knocked a hot dog out of a guy's hand in the concession stand.
It's so funny. I mean, are you still there?
I'm still here.
Okay. It just stopped there all of a sudden. I thought, what happened there? But Steve Dalkowski passing away, he had such a terrible, hard life after baseball, and that was the case with a lot of the people that are featured in your book, Left on Base in the Bush Leagues. Yes.
So in so many cases, these were guys who had great talents, but they weren't disciplined enough to channel those talents or keep them just on the field. In Dalkowski's case, he was a hard thrower, and he also a hard drinker, and he couldn't control either one. Joe Taylor, who I write about in the book, most people think that if Joe had been able to control the alcohol instead of the alcohol controlling him, he would have been in the Hall of Fame. He was that great a hitter. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, you have guys like Ron Netchai. And Netchai's case, he after jumping up from Class D in Bristol, Tennessee, to the Pirates in '52, he went into the Army and he hurt his arm and came out and was never the same. So there's a lot of what-ifs. I like what the Boston Globe said on the obituary of Steve Dalkowski, and they called him baseball's greatest what-if story. But I have always been fascinated by these what-if stories. What could have happened if things had just been slightly different in the lives of some of these players?
Yeah, well, the interesting thing to me about what you just said is certainly baseball's greatest what-if story could have been Ron Netchai, and just may have been, because there's a fella who Branch Rickey thought was the best pitcher he ever saw, the best pitching prospect ever.
That's right, and most people were shocked when Branch Rickey said that, and he had others on his team like Stan Musial. He had some great players on that team that he named at a luncheon in Pittsburgh one day, but he called Ron Netchai the greatest all-around pitcher I ever saw, but he was never a major league regular. But he had the best fastball. He had all the learning aptitudes. He was great, and that was Branch Rickey on Ron Netchai. Mm-hmm. Joe Garagiola said the same thing, best pitching prospect I ever saw. And Joe said he could have been a big winner as big a winner as ever. He picked up a baseball had he not been hurt. What was interesting about Ron Netchai, he was compared at that time with Dizzy Dean, one of the all-time great pitchers. And Dizzy Dean was broadcasting. And when Dizzy Dean heard about Ron striking out 27 at Bristol, he called it pretty fair country pitching. But he couldn't pronounce Netchai's name, so he just called him Necktie. Ron Necktie. And to this day, Ron Netchai has a license plate that reads Necktie.
Yeah. And he's still living in Pittsburgh.
Yes, he does. He lives right outside Pittsburgh. A great guy. I've first interviewed Ron in the 70s, and we've kept in touch over the years. And, his feat of striking out 27 in a 9-inning game is ranked as the number one achievement in baseball history.
How about that? And just couldn't make it in the big leagues thanks to that arm injury. Well, Gaylon, it's been another good visit with us here today, talking about Steve Dalkowski and Ron Netchai and some of those other great minor leaguers. The book is Left on Base in the Bush Leagues. I appreciate your time today.
I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
All right, it is the voice of Indiana County, WCCS AM 1160, 101.1 FM, 101.1 FM.